1 week from today, Donald Trump takes the helm of the world's most powerful country. He has already signaled that under his presidency, the U.S. will throw its weight around in ways that could rock adversaries and allies. Tonight, a global perspective. Our correspondents bring you the view from 6 cities where they're bracing for radical change.
I'm Susan Ormiston. For Russia, Donald Trump was simply the better alternative. U.S.-Russian relations had cratered to a new low under the Obama administration, and it was seen that Hillary Clinton would just continue on that same course. So, Donald Trump, well, why not? Besides, he'd been so flattering of Vladimir Putin, how smart he was, how popular, how effectively he controlled this country. Donald Trump said he was willing to work with Russia to find solutions to some of the world's biggest problems. On Russia's list, well, a solution to Syria, with Putin in a central role, pushing back against NATO's expansion on Russia's borders, and lifting those vexing American sanctions against Russia. Overall, lightening up the demonizing discourse in Washington. But after some of Trump's key nominees sounding the alarm again this week about Russia as a threat, it's hard to know what the Kremlin will be able to exact out of a Trump presidency after all. Donald Trump said this week he might not get along with Vladimir Putin, but he boasted that Russia, under his leadership, will respect the U.S. more than under any other government. That's a tall order, not necessarily seen as a gesture of friendship here.
I'm Sasha Petrusik. Chinese officials have always expected a tough line on trade from Donald Trump, but Taiwan, that was a surprise. They were shocked when Trump showed such strong support for the self-governing island that China considers its territory, a part of what Beijing calls One China, and a foundation of U.S.-Chinese relations. For decades, Washington has respected that, walking a fine line between helping Taiwan with trade and defense, while at the same time recognizing the government here in Beijing as the only real representative of China. Well, Trump says he doesn't feel bound by any of that. In fact, he says he may even move closer to Taiwan if China doesn't renegotiate some trade deals to make them more beneficial to the U.S. Now, that may simply be a negotiating tactic, but for Beijing, One China is non-negotiable. Even questioning it upsets all kinds of delicate balances, diplomatic, economic, even military, between Beijing and Washington. And from China's perspective, this is nothing short of Trump's brinksmanship.
I'm Nala Ayed. Well, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said it best in a warning to EU members on Thursday. She said there was no eternal guarantee of close cooperation across the Atlantic. Now, that is a fairly pragmatic assessment of what has been a source of anxiety ever since Donald Trump was elected. Anxiety over 2 main pillars that have defined the relationship between the EU and the US in recent history. One is the importance of NATO, and the other is the relatively like-minded policy towards Russia. Now, in his comments before and after the election, Donald Trump has cast doubt on both. Now, Trump has made no secret of his admiration for Russian President Vladimir Putin or of his skepticism about NATO. In fact, he said he wants to improve relations with Russia, which has been under sanctions imposed both by the US and the EU because of its actions in Ukraine. Now, meanwhile, NATO has been stepping up its anti-Russia rhetoric, and NATO soldiers, including hundreds of Canadians, will soon be deployed closer to the Russian border than Moscow would like. Still, experts believe that with advice, Trump is unlikely to undo decades of stable, predictable U.S. foreign policy. But in the corridors of power in Europe, there is definitely discomfort with what is likely Trump's defining trait, and that is unpredictability.
I'm Nina Köksal. It's complicated, and it's about to get a lot more complicated in the relationship between the U.S. and Turkey in 2017. After Trump's win, the Turkish government said it welcomed his administration, likely because they think it's going to be easier to work with than a Clinton government might have been. There are also really similar populist leadership styles between Turkey's President Erdogan and Donald Trump, the same kind of lashing out, tough talk, and rhetoric when people speak out against them. There are also business ties. A large Turkish corporation paid millions to Trump to use the Trump name on 2 office towers here in Istanbul. So, it sounds like a good relationship, right? But there are a number of issues that these two countries could clash on right out of the gate. Now, right after the election, Turkey brushed aside the comments that Donald Trump made during the campaign about Muslims. President Erdogan said it was just politics, not important. But it's going to be a lot harder for Turkey's government to brush aside the comments of the Secretary of State nominee Trump has put forward. Rex Tillerson, in his confirmation hearing, said, yes, it wants to keep working with Turkey in Syria, but it also said that the Kurdish fighters, the YPG, should keep fighting ISIS there. The YPG, according to Turkey, is a terror organization and wants it taken out of the equation entirely.
I'm Derek Stoffel. Could this stately residence behind me soon have a new occupant? If Donald Trump follows through on a campaign promise, the American ambassador to Israel could live here in Jerusalem. Trump has said that he will move the American embassy from Tel Aviv here to the Holy City. It's a contentious proposal for sure, as it would recognize Israel's exclusive claim to Jerusalem. Right now, most nations, including Canada, keep their diplomatic missions about an hour down the road in Tel Aviv until the final status of Jerusalem is settled. But Trump wants to show that he's a strong supporter of Israel, and he's upset the Palestinians in doing so. They've called for a weekend of protests right across the Muslim world to try to convince Trump to reconsider the move. At the same time, Trump's choice for ambassador is also controversial. David Friedman opposes the two-state solution that many here say is the only way to find peace. While welcomed by many Israelis, Friedman has been denounced by the Palestinians, who are worried about what a Trump presidency might mean for their efforts to establish their own state with its capital here in Jerusalem.
I'm Margaret Evans. No man is an island, or so the English poet John Donne wrote. But last year, a majority of Brits decided, albeit by a narrow majority, that they very much like being an island unto themselves, and they decided to leave the European Union after a partnership of more than 4 decades. And it's very difficult for many people here to decouple the results of that referendum from the election of Donald Trump. That's partly because people on both sides of the Brexit debate view the results of those 2 votes as the symptom of a similar malaise. Some people seeing it as a liberating cure, the results, some people seeing them as the death knell for their liberal values. And on top of that, it piles on the uncertainty here in Britain as the country tries to figure out what its place will be in the world after it does leave the European Union. The outgoing U.S. President Barack Obama warned Brits that if they wanted to negotiate a trade deal with the United States and they left the EU, they'd have to go to the back of the line. The incoming administration says not so. We'll invite you back to the front of the line. But many people here fear that Donald Trump will be erratic and unpredictable. Can they trust on that kind of a pledge? The bottom line is that the election of Donald Trump reminds Brits of their own internal divisions and of the fact that they are now very much adrift, headed in unknown directions, maybe even towards a world leader who sees himself as an island with not very much time for old friends.